Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Whisper of the Heart from 1995. And this is continuing my quest to review all of the films of Studio Ghibli. Whisper of the Heart is a very different kind of Studio Ghibli film. That might be because this is the first theatrically released Studio Ghibli film not directed by Hayao Miyazaki or Isao Takahata. It is directed by Yoshifumi Kondo, who was a protege of Hayao Miyazaki's and considered to be the next great Studio Ghibli animation director. This is a lot slower paced of a Studio Ghibli film, and if you thought Takahata made slower slice of life films, this one takes the cake on that one to an extreme, because there's often times where I was wondering, like, what exactly is going on in this movie? What is it doing? It's a lot artier of a character study than I really thought Studio Ghibli would ever kind of attempt. Takahata and Miyazaki are a little more organized in their storytelling, or a little more refined in their storytelling. And Whisper of the Heart doesn't exactly have that. It plays more looser, in a good way actually. And I think that's what makes Whisper of the Heart kind of a very unique Studio Ghibli animated film, and why it kind of stands out, mostly because of its different director, and this is the only film he ever directed. It is such a different film about this young girl growing up, falling in love, and discovering the love of the written word. A young girl who is just graduating middle school and is trying to translate Country Road into Japanese. Why a John Denver song sung by Olivia Newton-John, I don't know. The score to this film is a little all over the place, but it works very well, much like a lot of Studio Ghibli films that use all sorts of different kinds of music or different sounding kinds of music. It all works throughout the film and helps the film. She's checking out tons of books, and over her summer break she wants to read 20 books. She loves reading books, and she keeps seeing that this one guy's name is on all the books, on the cards that she sees in the books, and her dad works at the library, and they're going to go more to a barcode system rather than a card system on books. And I actually have had that happen to me before, where I thought about, what was this person like? Why did they take out this book? Did they read this book? Did they like reading this book? Did they only read a part of it? I've actually taken out books and seen people I know's names in them and been like, hey, do you remember taking this book out? Because it fascinates me, but it fascinated her as well. She becomes fascinated with the idea of this person and who it possibly is, and as she's starting her, I guess their like test to decide what high school you eventually go to, she falls in love with a boy whose name is in these books by kind of coincidence, after she follows a cat who's riding the subway. Not a fantastical cat, just a regular cat who she sees riding the subway, and she follows him into this old man's house, and she sees this cat doll called the Baron, who she's very fascinated by, and she keeps running into this one young guy who she finds out is the boy who took out all those books that she had also taken out. She finds out he wants to make violins, and he wants to go to school in Italy, and he eventually convinces his parents to do that after they have fallen in love. And when he does that and is going to be gone for a while, she motivates herself to write a story, write a novel, because she loves reading so much, and she decides to write it before he comes back. It's a bit of a strange film, because for a lot of it you're kind of just getting to know her, and I think that works for the film, because when she's writing the story there's not as much time for stuff like that. When the beginning parts happen and it's so slow and it takes up most of the film, it wore on my patience. I didn't hate the movie. I think its slowness is interesting because he has worked with Takahata and had worked on Only Yesterday and Grave of the Fireflies, and when you look at Whisper of the Heart, it seems like instead of looking back at a year or a couple of years and being nostalgic, this is really just a real time in someone's life, and how they found personal love and they found artistic love, and how those events transpired and how it got to that point. And usually if you think about your life, for me, how did I start working on certain things? How did this lead to that? And it's usually not a very exciting 3-act awesome story. It's usually more like something like this. And I think that's kind of the interesting idea of the complexity of Whisper of the Heart, but it also holds back in kind of that real life thing. It's not as dramatic as Miyazaki, although Miyazaki did write this film. Yoshifumi Kondo was going to be the next big Studio Ghibli director. He was primed to do it. He had worked with Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata from when they worked on Lupin III and on Panda Go Panda and Anne of Green Gables and Future Boy Conan. They worked with this guy for a long time. And Miyazaki wrote this film and storyboarded it, and apparently was overly involved, but eventually let Yoshifumi Kandu work by himself and direct it. And apparently he was talking about retiring and having Yoshifumi Kandu take over and directing all the films, but obviously he made Princess Mononoke after this, so one of many retirements. And you can tell that this is a different director, and it almost feels like a different writer. So I'm not sure how much Yoshifumi Kandu had to do with the script, or Miyazaki wrote it kind of in a different voice almost. I take it more as direction, because a director can really change the flow of a film. Auteurism has a lot to do with Studio Ghibli, and I think this film states that very well through its auteurism, that you'd think because Hayao Miyazaki wrote this, and I've seen other films he's written, and it almost feels a lot like him, almost similar to him. But this has a totally different feel than I've seen from later films like that. And I think that's why Yoshifumi Kandu was considered to be the next director, because he was so different. This does have more of an anime character design. The eyes are rounder, the design's different. It feels more manga inspired in a lot of ways. It doesn't feel like Miyazaki's design, but it definitely feels like the movements. At this point, Studio Ghibli was a studio, people were on salary, they reported to their desk every day kind of thing, and he worked with the same animators who worked on the previous couple films. What happened to Yoshifumi Kandu and why this is his only film is because he died after working on Princess Mononoke. He had an aneurysm, unfortunately, or a condition similar to an aneurysm, and his death started Miyazaki's first big retirement announcement after Princess Mononoke, because he was so shocked by it. Because one of the reasons Yoshifumi Kandu died was because he worked too hard, and he kind of worked himself to death. Apparently, they worked a lot harder at Studio Ghibli, and after that, Miyazaki worked at a more relaxed pace. Not too relaxed, he still made a lot of movies, and they're very complicated, and they looked very hard to make. But Yoshifumi Kandu's death is the reason Studio Ghibli's in the fix they're in now, because he pointed to them developing other directors. This is something they always wanted to do. That's why they started a studio, really, rather than have a production company that would just hire a bunch of animators. They had people on staff. They wanted other directors to take on that mantle. Had Yoshifumi Kandu lived, he would have probably made another film. I don't see anything about, was he planning another film? He worked on Princess Mononoke. He died after that film premiered. He was an animation director on several Studio Ghibli films for Takahata and Miyazaki. It's sad because the flow of this film is so different. The scenes where she's writing the book are so out there. He did a different design, apparently, like they were painted, they were done digitally, and I like that whenever they have kind of a fantasy sequence, it's done in a completely different style, but almost more radical than what Takahata would do. Like stylistically, just a total 180 from what he was doing. Takahata seemed to infuse that together in this weird kind of playful animation way. Yoshifumi Kandu was like, this is a different thing. I don't want this to flow together. A lot of people have complained about those sequences. I actually thought they were really cool. The moments about her book, when the grandfather's telling a story at one point about his past, those look radically different from what's going on. So they stand out and they're important to the film. And I think that's what I like about them. In her case, I don't know how that story makes really a lot of sense, but it's supposed to be rough and a teenager story and how she got into writing. So it kind of makes sense if you think about it. But I liked how radically different and crazy it was, because it was like, whoa, you're writing a real weird fantasy. I hope this works out and isn't some like weird diatribe or something of your insanity. It was a nice break from this very slice of life kind of film. It's the kind of movie that it takes a while for me to really get into it. You really need to sit with it. It's really a different kind of film. And I've noticed a lot of people can accept that. When I've watched other reviews and heard what other people have to say about certain Ghibli films and the different reactions that I'm surprised by. But this one, Whisper of the Heart, I would think different director, different flow. This would get torn apart, but it isn't. And I think it's because it is fairly well told. Yoshifumi Kandu was much like Miyazaki and Takahata when they got to Ghibli and when they got to that phase in their career, was a well-seasoned animator and a well-seasoned storyteller. And there's a confidence about doing this kind of an odd movie that you wouldn't see from a younger director. And he was, I think, in his 40s when he made this, so he wasn't exactly a younger director. Miyazaki and Takahata, they would be a little rougher. They had a lot more to prove. It seemed like Yoshifumi Kandu didn't. He had full confidence in his story. That's why this film is kind of unique, because if you look at their films, they really had something to prove for a long time, which made their early films really awe-inspiring and interesting, and I think it worked for it. But he doesn't seem to have that angst He just wants to make this nice story about a girl who loves reading and loves seeing in the card catalog this guy's name, and they fall in love. All these little tiny details. Miyazaki loved tiny details and loved just watching people in a city. This felt very Miyazaki. I honestly, he felt so much like a protege of Miyazaki, but doing his own thing more so than I've seen any of the other non-Miyazaki Takahata Studio Ghibli directors really do. And maybe it's because I know more about the studio at this point than I have when I saw those other films that has kind of infused what I think about this film and this director and the way he's telling the story. They have so many films about female protagonists, but this is one that really shows a female protagonist finding themselves. And in this, it's interesting that you could say, oh, it's this teenage love story. I don't know, she finds out who she is. And there's so many love stories where a woman has to find out who she is through love, which is like shitty. That's such a male bullshit thing. But in this film, that's not exactly what happens. She learns who she is through writing this book, and she even says she knows herself even better now because she did this. And you know her, like, why she wants to do this country road thing for graduation, which is weird, but whatever. You get her interests, you get a lot about her, and she's a real strong female protagonist, but not in that way that she's heroic or something like that. I like the change of pace for Ghibli in this. She is like a real girl. She has her real interests, and she really defined herself. And I think when you look at Whisper of the Heart, that's what's so beautiful about it. And not even that it's a female protagonist, but also that, and I think it passes the bench test, but also that as a character, this character of this young girl is so well defined and discovers who she is. And that's an interesting thing to see happen in a slower fashion than like Only Yesterday and Ocean Waves, where you're seeing like a period of time, like a couple of years or a year, play out between this other story. This is just so concentrated on this one thing that you're left alone with this story, and it's a really interesting and amazing thing to see life play out just the way Miyazaki did, but it's almost more patient because he doesn't want to have a witch delivery service or a flying pig. He just wants to do this girl. And I can see how Yoshifumi Kondo was the protege of Hayao Miyazaki because he cared just as much about character as Takahata and Miyazaki did, and he was the real protege of Studio Ghibli. And it's interesting to see him really not be as interested in the fantastical elements, which this film does have, and the poster really is like, look at this fantasy. It's not really like that. It's really just about this girl learning about who she is. And those are the moments I think about in my childhood and when I was a teen, when I really discovered something about movies or discovered something about myself through a relationship I had, or through a friendship, or through watching a movie, or through working on a movie that nobody saw because it sucked, but I learned so much through. Whisper of the Heart has all that in it, and it's an important part of growing up and becoming an adult. Seeing that captured on film in such a way without having all the bells and whistles that they usually have to have, which I love, by the way. I'm not disparaging them too much, but I think Yoshifumi Kondo wanted to do it in a different way, and it shows why he was a different director. And it's a real tragedy he didn't get to go on to make more films, but I think Whisper of the Heart, since it is unfortunately the only film, is strong enough of an entry that I understand why so many people like it, and I like watching this slower character animated film. So if you have seen Whisper of the Heart and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And if you would like to check out my other Studio Ghibli reviews, then click on the annotation below for the Studio Ghibli review playlist. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.